Howdy, y'all. Caleb here. We're talking about Skinks and Age of Sigmar 3.0. Now, Skinks are not dead. They're not done. They did get a point increase. You're going to have to take less of them. Their support increased in price, but they still have a place in our army if you're playing Seraphon. And especially if you're playing Fangs of Sotek, we still have some great tricks and tips that we can use on our skink hordes. Now, you won't be seeing as many skinks in the Seraphon army list as you're used to. That's partly due to the reinforcement points that you have to spend to upgrade their unit size. But we are still going to see them. So I do have. I'm using some of these slides from the last time we reviewed Skinks. You won't be able to play your Skinks like this anymore. I do have quite a few extra Skinks that I'm going to have to find something to do with. But they still have a place on the table. Our War Scroll hasn't changed for Skinks. They're still a terrible War Scroll when you first look at it. They have a 6-up save, only 1 wound. They have a decent move of 8 and bravery of 5. Now in Starborn, that bravery goes up to 10, which is fantastic. You probably won't see Skinks too often in Coalesce because that bravery gets hit pretty hard. You're probably going to be taking them mostly with the Bolt Spitters, which have a 16-inch range. Huge range there. That's great, especially when paired with the 8-inch move. And they hit on 5s, wound on 5s, no rend, 1 damage. On the surface, that is a terrible War Scroll. What could you possibly do with this? Well, we do get some buffs here, and we'll go over these quickly. But you do get an ability down there called the Swarming Cohort, and you get to add 1 to their attack characteristics as long as you have 15 or more. So now they have 2 attacks sitting on 5s and 5s. And if you're taking the shields, the Star Bucklers, you get +1 to their saves. So you do get some buffs here that you can add to them. The saves, it is worth noting that those saves, you can only go +1 to saves now. So we used to have a lot of tricks where we could get Skinks up to 3-up save. And now that's not really going to be possible. You can still stack saves on top of them, and it kind of negates rend, but you're only ever going to be able to cumulatively modify a dice by 1. So you're pretty much always going to be at that 5-up save with these guys, unless they give you more rend than you have saves stacked on them. So they are a little bit less durable in our army, and that's a shame, but it is what it is. So most of these numbers we're going to run today, we're looking at the Bolt Spitters and the Shields. So that's kind of what I'm running with my Skinks. I think that's kind of the standard output. You can get a little bit more bang for your buck if you go a Javelin, but it's very short range, and so it's a little bit trickier to use and not quite as versatile to hit things around on the board. But it is important to notice that you do get the double attacks if you have more than 15. Unfortunately, we are limited now to only taking 30 in a unit because of the reinforcement points. So Skinks are a base unit size of 10, and they cost 75 points now. So they went up 15 points, a nice little hefty increase there for Skinks, and that was probably warranted. They were quite a pain to deal with for our opponents, and so a point increase along with a lot of other stuff that went up in AOS 3. The Skinks got their point increase too. But reinforcement points in Age of Sigmar 3, you can only spend 2 reinforcement points on a battle line unit. And so Skinks are battle lines, so you can up them twice. So you can go from 10 Skinks to 20 to 30. And so 30 is your max unit that you're going to have. And that does require 2 of your reinforcement points. And so if you're playing a Fangs of Sotek list, you're probably going to have 2 big units of Skinks for those 60 Skinks on the board, which does reduce our output quite a bit. They come in a little bit cheaper because normally you'd take 40 in the previous book for 240, and now you're taking 30 for 225. So you save a few points there, but you are reducing your damage quite a bit. If we look at just the baseline War Scroll for 30 Skinks, here's our damage table. You're doing 3 damage against a 4-up save. As I said, their War Scroll is terrible. Never take Skinks without support. And so we will look at the support guys and see what's happened with them. Skinks do require support. Absolutely. So our 2 standard support heroes for our Skinks are the Skink Starpriest. They're on the left, and he is at 130 points, went up 10 points. You still get your extra 5-up extra command point in the hero phase, which is very nice, especially in Age of Sigmar 3, where there's lots of things that we want to spend our command points on. We were already a command point heavy army anyway. Now these extra abilities to generate command points are critical for us. His staff, you point it to your unit of Skinks, and on 6s to wound in their shooting and combat, it's going to be an additional mortal wound. That's where most of their damage output has come from in the last book, and it continues to this book as well. The spell lore, you're going to always probably take the Hand of Glory on the Skink Starpriest so that you can get those free reroll 1s to hit. And so that is a great spell for him. And there's not as much reroll 1s to hit in Age of Sigmar 3, and so having that ability on that spell is very good when you're rolling 60 dice for 30 skinks. The other support piece is the Skink Priest, who went up 10 points to 80 points. And if you notice, we've both of these went up. The Skinks went up. Basically, this core group is at about the same price as it was before, but you've lost 10 Skinks or 20 shots. So for the same price, you've reduced the output by about 25%. So pretty big hit for the Skinks, but it's probably warranted. They were one of the headache units in the last edition of Sigmar. So Skink Priest, he still has his staff, which you roll a dice. Now this is critical because this is not a prayer. Unless they FAQ this and change it in the FAQs that come out, this is just an ability. And so you don't have to spend a command point on it, you just roll. And on a 3-up, you point it at the Skinks. They can now run and shoot, they can run and charge, and they get +1 to their save. Now, as we said before, they probably have shields, and so this +1 to save isn't going to help you against no rend, but if you're facing -1 rend attacks into the Skinks, this will help negate that. You can only go up. You can only cumulatively modify that dice by +1 to their saves. So keep that in mind. You can stack those saves, but it only helps against rend. He does have a command ability, which is good. This is +1 to hit. And this ability from the Skink Priest is good because it lasts until the next hero phase, where all-out attack is also +1 to hit. That's your generic command ability that you can use in the shooting phase. It's also +1 to hit. You can't stack it unless you're facing something that's -1 to hit. Then you may want to, but it only lasts for that one phase. This one lasts until your next hero phase, and that's great on Skinks because Skinks can shoot in the charge phase if they're charged with either their Fangs of Sotek ability or the new Unleash Hell ability, where you can fire at a charging unit, basically Overwatch. So this one lasts that whole time. So this is better than the generic +1 to hit. The great thing about the Skink Priest is now they have access to some generic prayers. There's one that's a smite, which will hurt the enemy, but also they're an enemy priest, which is pretty good. I guarantee you this little Skink Priest is going to get hit by that smite during games. This guy is going to die easy now because there's going to be another priest on the table that's smiting this priest. So if you can, pick off their priests because you don't want to lose this guy. He has almost no wounds. But another generic prayer that's really good is this Bless. It gives a 6-up ward save, and so that's a great way to make up for the lack of extra saves on the Skinks, is to give this Bless prayer to your big horde of Skinks. And because he doesn't have a prayer lore currently, and Seraphon doesn't have a prayer lore, these generic prayers are a great addition for the Skink Priest. It gives them an extra thing to do in those prayers. Also, there's a great prayer that it requires an enhancement bonus, but you can get a curse. It is called Curse, and on 6s to hit, it's a mortal wound. Now you have to apply it to a enemy unit within 9 inches, so it's very close range. So this isn't something that's going to happen turn 1, but you're looking further in the game. That prayer enhancement of Curse is pretty awesome. It does go off on a 4-up, and so it can be a little streaky, especially since we don't have any way to reroll prayers in our army or add any extra prayer, like a +1 to your prayer or something like that, like other armies do. So it is a little bit streaky. You got to get in close, but fantastic ability. We'll look at some of that damage output later. So Skink Priest definitely got a little bit better in that he has some prayers to do now. So that's pretty cool. So our basic loadout from the last edition is kind of the same. In fact, it hasn't really changed all that often. We're putting all those buffs on these guys, and they still have huge range. We have the threat range listed there for Fangs of Sotek. So you're up to 34-inch effective range in Fangs of Sotek, and when you can take into account that you have a 12-inch deployment off the back of the board, that's literally the entire board from like my edge to your edge. So now you cannot hide from these skinks. Plus, you can always just teleport them if you need to, but they do have great range, and those abilities we're going to stack from those 2 heroes. You can see those listed there. And let's look at the damage for those 30 skinks. As expected, the damage is decreased, and it's decreased about 25%. We're down 25% of the shots, and so as we see there, 30 buffed skinks in AOS 3 will only do about 11.5 damage, where they did about 15.5 damage previously. And so you do see a significant decrease in the damage output of the skinks in AOS 3, and that's solely due to their the unit size. One of the interesting things in this next slide is how you can only apply 1 command point per unit per phase from a command or from a hero. And that actually doesn't really, I thought it was going to affect the skinks more than it really did. And as I started kind of charting it out here, we don't really have a lot that overlaps. So in our hero phase, we really only have 1 command ability that we really want to use on these, and that's that Skink Priest +1 to hit. So that's one that you definitely want to use on there. All the other stuff currently is free abilities, like the Skink Priest, where his staff and the Starpriest staff. Both of those are free abilities. You have to roll for the Skink Priest, but they don't cost command points. And then we have a prayer. You can only do 1 prayer, or you can only do that prayer 1 time. But I'm looking to try to get Curse into my armies and use that up close and personal once you get there, probably in turn 2 or 3. Spells, you're going to want to apply Hand of Glory to them. I think we've already talked about some of that. You can use a command ability in the movement phase at the double. You do have to do it before you roll your run roll now, so be wary of that. If your skinks are needing to get that full 6 inches, then make sure you roll for it. And shooting phase, you can add 1 to your hit rolls if you're facing something where you need +2 to hit to nullify their -1 to hit. If we add on that curse enhancement, look at what it does now. This is an incredible prayer because it's adding mortal wounds on 6s to hit. We also have mortal wounds on 6s to wound. And so if you can get in range to do that curse prayer for a Skink Priest, it adds just straight up 10 mortals. You're rolling 60 dice on 6s, you're doing mortals. So you should be getting about 10 mortals from that 1 prayer. Fantastic prayer to add to your list. It does cost an enhancement, so try to build your battalion to where you can get an enhancement if you want to take this, and it's not really something you can do turn 1. Man, I would love it if we get a big, tougher priest later on. Maybe if Engine of the Gods, one of these days, it has a Skink Priest on it, but it doesn't get the priest keyword. I would love for the Engine of the God to get the priest keyword, so I could put this prayer on something a little bit tougher that might last until turn 2 or 3. Because that Skink Priest, I'm not feeling real confident him lasting that long in the game, long enough to get within 9 of an enemy. But it can be useful, and if it is, you're going to explode stuff. There are some other extra abilities that we can do, like the Skink Starseer. I think this one now is actually a really good spell. It was good before, but I think now with the limit of your pluses to save and things, this one will really help out a lot. It does do -1 to save until your next Euro phase, so this is a great spell to cast against an enemy that you know you're going to be attacking. It doesn't really add a whole lot. I mean, it basically gives your weapons -1 to rend, which is easily negated by command points and stuff like that. It adds a little bit to your output here. Now we're up to 25 damage for 30 skinks, so we're kind of building on it. Now, most of that came from those mortals in that prayer, but you are able to get some extra damage on it. we're not done yet. I had another extra, and I think this is actually worth building your list towards. If you're left with a couple extra points, build in this Triumph Inspired. This is +1 to wound rolls, and it's because you get to pick your Triumph, you don't have to roll for it anymore. You can actually, this is one I would leave 10 points off my list to add Triumph into my army, so that if I know I'm hitting a unit with my Skinks that I really want to hit, instead of being on 5s and 5s, I'm on 4 and 5s because of my Skink Priest. I'm rerolling 1s because of my Starpriest, and then I'm going to 4s and 4s because of this Triumph. And now, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you're rolling for those mortals, you're rolling, trying to get as many dice through on 60 dice as you can. That +1 to wound is pretty vital. And we don't really have a lot of ways to get, do we have any other ways to get +1 to wound in our army? I don't think so, not for Skinks. So I like that Triumph a lot. It does increase the damage until almost 30. Why couldn't we get it right over 30? 29 damage from Skinks if you can get all those little extras piled on. If you take out the curse, you're looking at about 20 damage, which is quite respectable for 30 Skinks. And so I think they still have a pretty good place in our army, especially when we're looking at armies are going to be getting smaller in this edition. So conclusion, they did lose some base output. I think that's undeniable. You're losing 20 dice from every time you're shooting. You're going to be, your output's just going to be less. I mean, that's no doubt about it. Fewer bodies on the table. So holding objectives, you're gonna have less there. You're not going to be quite as tough. I used to love to get my Skinks up to 4-up save pretty easily. That was always nice to keep them alive and on the board. More expensive. That's just based on the point increases and having to take less of them. I think there's a huge potential with the Curse Prayer. It's easily the best buff the Skinks can get, but it does rely on that 4-up prayer roll to get those mortals on the 6s to hits. So 4-up prayer roll is very streaky. You're only going to get it half the time, statistics. And it takes up one of your enhancements. So you got to get close, you got to roll for it, and it takes up a valuable enhancement slot. So it's got a lot of potential, but it's also quite risky. As I said here, 30 Skinks and a Skink Priest, that's only 305 points. It's a nice, cheap combo, but it's extremely streaky. If you're adding on that prayer roll, you're getting in. You can still do respectable damage, 15 damage there from just that unit and one Skink Priest, but it's very hard to pull off there. You got to get in close, and you got to get that prayer off. So overall, I think once we look back up at the damage output of our standard loadout, we're looking at about 12 damage there for our Skinks and our 2 support heroes. So it's gone down. It still has a lot of usability. I think what you'll see a lot is you'll see your 2 units of Skinks, and you'll be doing your damage. You'll have your normal support heroes. You'll do your damage. So you're talking, 24 damage in your shooting phase. Then somebody charges you in. You can spend 1 command ability to pull back on the Fang's ability to shoot again. So another 12 damage. And then you can use the Unleash Hell on the other unit, if it's supporting it, or if somebody's charging that one, to do another 12 damage. So you're not going to have as much output because you can't use that Fangs of Sotek ability every single time because you're limited to how many command points you can spend on an ability each phase, which is 1. So you can use them on different abilities though. So it's going to take some getting used to. But with that Unleash Hell, with the fallback from Fangs of Sotek, we can still play those wary fighter games that the Skinks like. So I think they still have a good place here in our army. They are doing less damage, but I think they can still do work. All right, let me know what you guys think about Skinks. Have I missed a vital buff here for our army? And let me know in the comments. We'll catch y'all next time.